Добрый день! Сегодня мы на пятом вебинаре из серии «Звезды ювелирного искусства». И сегодня с нами английский ювелир, звезда английской ювелирной сцены Стивен Вебстер. И мы со Стивеном подключаемся из разных концов мира. Такой уж у нас новый мир. Поэтому заранее просим прощения, если будут какие-то технические неполадки. Но надеемся, наш эфир состоится, все пройдет гладко. И сразу напоминаю всем нашим постоянным и новым зрителям, что, пожалуйста, обязательно присылайте вопросы, чтобы я их могла задать нашему герою. Hi, Steven.
Hi, привет.
Oh, is it all Russian, or you can say something more because of Asa?
Как дела? Как дела?
Great.
Yeah, no, I know really useless things like farm animals and colors. Because I learned my Russian while my wife was teaching my daughter to speak. so it kind of stops there. Yeah. We're better.
But your daughter, she speaks Russian, right?
Yeah, absolutely. She's fluent in Russian. Yeah.
Okay, so they can have secrets. They can have secrets.
Well, they can. Yeah. I understand.
But today we will share your secrets and the secrets of the profession. And let's start with the very initial things, how it all started for you, how you decided to take this crazy path and become a jeweler.
Well, I went to art school to be a fashion designer, I thought, because I was like a 15-year-old and I liked fashion and I could draw, and I thought, okay, then let's see what being a fashion designer is all about. And I think, the first time I stepped into an art school was that moment. And in the fashion department, I was kind of met by sort of all girls and sewing machines, and I just felt I was a bit uneasy. I was so young and I couldn't really connect with this being what fashion was about. I knew nothing. And so when I was, visiting, I was sort of shown around the jewelry workshop, and that was the first time that I'd ever thought that, you could be a jeweler, that there was a way to make a living as a jeweler. And it was just a very intriguing sort of place, a workshop. It was very different to probably most of the other places in an art school. It was very grubby. There was flames, there was smells, there was a lot of noise, and people appeared to be working on treasure. And I just became really sort of fascinated by what was going on in that place. And so I was able to start art school as on a jewelry course. And I think from that moment, I just knew that I was going to love this. I didn't know it would be for my whole life, but for that time, it was just something that I found very fascinating. It was all about craft skills. It really wasn't about design or, having my own ideas. It was really about learning the incredible skills of what it takes to make a piece of jewelry.
But as I remember, you started with not very creative profession in jewelry, like making chains, right? So you had this kind of practice.
So basically, my time at art school was very varied. I think they try to, they tried to kind of introduce you to all aspects of the process of making jewelry and actually silverware as well. So I loved making silverware because, it's like silver for the table. So it's quite big and it was quite brutal. There's a lot of hammering involved and it's kind of big scale and it really appealed to me. I think as that sort of young teenager, these processes were I don't know, they just were incredible, you know, things to get involved in. And then I, you know, when that finished, I went out into the industry. And I think the place where I ended up was a goldsmithing company. So it really was different from being what we'll call a jeweler with gemstones. All we did was make gold things. So a lot of that was gold chains. And I think what you're talking about is that, you know, you start first, you're really enthusiastic, you know, you've got to make a gold chain. But the problem with the gold chain is you never can see the end, you know, the chain just keeps on coming. And I think after probably 2 years, I thought, okay, this is not this industry that I imagined when I was at art school. And probably I was quite disillusioned by where I was. But I was, you know, I was still very ambitious, and I knew enough to know that there were different approaches to making jewelry. So I just went knocking on doors, and I sort of knocked on the door of a designer jeweler at the time. His name was John Donald, and he was, I think in the 70s, this is in the 70s, he was quite avant-garde. And you know, avant-garde meant, you know, there was a lot of design and artistic kind of input rather than it being sort of the discipline of just sort of doing the same thing all the time. And so he just happened to have a job. And so I changed from the chain making company to now working for this guy that was much more arty. And even though I was still young, I was probably, you know, 19 or 20, I was given quite a lot of freedom around what the jewelry was going to look like. And I learned a real lot from him about my future, where I was going to end up in this industry. So, you know, that covers kind of my initial 5 or 6 years as training, really.
And how the story of the brand Stephen Webster began. So why you decided to have your own brand, and why you decided to call it Stephen Webster, to call it with your name?
Yeah, well, probably because I'm not very imaginative, but I think so many. Yeah, I mean, so many things. You know, these days I do quite a lot of mentoring for young people, and I think in 2021, you know, young people come at things so differently. You know, they've sort of got this vision for several steps ahead, you know, and so sort of naming of a brand is something they've been thinking about. Whereas I think for me, I was like, you know, I want to be able to make jewelry beautifully. That was my first thing, you know, and then how I got to the brand was another 10 years, because I sort of went, after I'd finished all my training, I started my own little company. It wasn't really a company, it was just me, and I'm called Stephen Webster. So that was just Stephen Webster, a jeweler, you know, but I still wasn't designing. I was still making other people's designs. And then sort of out of the blue, somebody came and offered me a job, and I actually thought the guy was American because he sounded American, but he happened to be Canadian. And he offered to fly me to Canada, where I hadn't even been on an airplane. So I flew to Canada, and it was probably the biggest shock of my life. First of all, it was minus 30 degrees. I think some Russians can probably relate to what minus 30 like. I was there in January, and I just, well, first of all, I thought I'd been kidnapped, because it was like, well, why has this person taken me to this place that looks like winter wonderland? But I think, you know, it happened that this guy was an amazing kind of collector and authority of exotic gemstones. And he wanted a jeweler to work with because he wasn't a jeweler. And so by that time, I was good as a jeweler. And he would just go all around the world, go to Brazil, he'd go to Africa, he'd go to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and he would just come back to Canada with all these gems. And so my life became, I would sort of be there in this workshop, and he would just put these things on my bench, and I'd have to sort of think what I was going to make jewelry with these amazing rocks, things like tanzanites and tourmalines and savorites and aquamarines, and things that were not really part of what being a jeweler in London had been like. That was diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, etc., rubies. So it was a real education that I would never have got had I stayed in London. And I think I stayed there for about 4 years, and by the time every year after year, I started to convince some of my friends who I'd been to art school with to come and join me. So after 4 years, I had like 4 or 5 of my friends in this cold place, and
Wow.
which made it more bearable. Yeah, but from there, just very quickly, from there, I left. I went back to London. I couldn't take being in Canada anymore, and the guy sold the business. And he very quickly said to me, "Would you come back? I'm going to move to California." I said, "Okay, I'll come to California." So I kind of moved back to California. So I had a 10-year period where I was developing a style that I'd say was the foundation of Stephen Webster's style. I was getting all these amazing gemstones. I became very experienced in working with an exotic gemstone. And then when I finally moved back to London and started Stephen Webster as it is today, which was 1990, I already had a style which I would never have had previously, So I kind of brought all that experience with me.
Okay, we will continue to tell your story, but we have very energetic crowd today, because normally, people are shy to ask questions, but we have some questions already. So I'll ask the first one. And the question is, are you following the Russian jewelers? And do you know anything about Russian jewelry market?
Well, the Russian jewelry market, I kind of say I must know, because I've been in the Russian market for nearly 20 years. And I'm very lucky that I think I've got some very, very good Russian clients, and there's a good enthusiasm for what we produce. So I know about the Russian market. And what's been interesting over the 20 years that I've been in the market, I suppose, there's been an emergence of talent that comes from Russia. I think the first time I ever encountered what I call was a very Russian designer was called the Jewelry Theatre. I don't know if that's something people know about. And I thought the guy
they're quite famous.
Yeah, he was just amazing, and he was obviously very, very skilled, and that was kind of, for me, the first time I'd encountered really a modern, contemporary Russian jeweler. So yeah.
Okay, and talking about Russian market, you are with Mercury currently, right?
I'm with Mercury, yes, who are amazing partners, I must say.
Yeah, so speaking about Russian market, Steven knows well, because he had his boutique on Patriarch Chiffons, and now so he's sold with our big retailer Mercury Group. But getting back to your story, so when you woke up and understood that you are famous?
Well, I think there was a few things. There was a few things that kind of brought me from being a jeweler that nobody knew, because even right up until the middle of the 90s, jewelry was a very quiet kind of space. It wasn't people knew fashion designers, they even knew shoe designers, they knew hat designers, but jewelers were not so much about the personalities. You know, there was Cartier, there's Van Cleef, there was Bulgari. You had old jewelry houses. But as far as the name, the designer sort of that was working, people didn't really know. And I think what happened for me, but you know, I'm going to say I was lucky, was that I got some high-profile clients. I mean, the biggest one really for me was Madonna, who was, you know, the equivalent of the most famous person on the planet at the time. And she loved my jewelry. And, you know, I went to meet her, and she just was like really taken with it. And so I had someone who was, you know, the most famous person. And also, I think people looked like they do today to someone like a Madonna in the middle 90s for style. And so she would wear like my big cocktail rings, and she would wear them on this finger. And that was already really different. It sounds a bit crazy now because people wear everything everywhere, but you know, that was already quite different. And it seemed to have quite a lot of attitude. And I think what happened was people wanted to know, who's this jeweler? You know, what's this? Where are you getting this jewelry from? And so it kind of became very, very quickly that we were starting to get written about. And I honestly, I don't think I ever would have thought a jeweler would be written about, because it was always quiet and it was under the radar. So it was just the times. The times were right. You know, I was very lucky to have such a high-profile person that was a champion. And then when she got married, I made the wedding rings. And I think the combination of those things, plus this new enthusiasm from the press, like Vogue and Harper's and W Magazine, they had room to find out what's jewelry all about. I mean, I remember the first interview I did with the press was the Daily Telegraph. So it's a proper newspaper. And the woman came into the shop and she looked at me and she said, "So are you what a jeweler looks like?" And I said, "Well, I'm what I look like." and she said, "Because I was expecting you to be like an old man with a loop." I mean, I am an old man now, but I wasn't then. I was, you know, this is quite a while ago. But it was quite funny. She literally said to me that, because it was like no one really knew what a jeweler looked like. So I think, to answer your question, there was just a lot of circumstance that put us up there on a level that we never thought, we never planned. It just happened. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what products, what jewelry pieces created by you would call iconic? You personally, because I think, well, I have my list, you know, like, and everyone has his list, but you personally, what are you proud of?
Well, I think, you know, I think the reason, if we go back to even that time, the reason why someone like a Madonna was attracted to my jewelry was because there wasn't so much jewelry that felt a bit rock and roll. You know, there was some silver jewelry that was a bit rock and roll, but you know, my jewelry is glamorous. It's got color and it's got gemstones and things that people associate with fine jewelry, and not sort of dark and silver jewelry. And I think that was a conscious decision of mine, because I thought this industry doesn't seem to connect with my life. You know, my life, I feel I'm one thing, and then jewelry seems to be something else. And even though I love making it, I love designing it, I'm sort of creating it for someone who's not me, and not, you know, not my wife and not my friends. And so I started to just make jewelry that I felt was probably a bit younger and a bit for a different lifestyle. And I think that was a very interesting sort of position to be in, because I've not really answered your question properly, but because I was sort of just doing things that I felt I wanted to do, and rather than following a trend, people then come to you. You're suddenly now the trend. And I think some of those pieces I did, like my rock star ring, you know, my sex and drugs and rock and roll ring, my crystal haze rings, they're all icons. They're still iconic. You know, I still sell them today. And I think, you know, like I made a rock star ring because I wanted to make a rock star ring. And the next thing is Elton John has bought one, Ozzy Osbourne's bought one, Pink has bought one. You're like, wow, there's a client for these rock star rings, you know, proper rock stars. And I think it's because there wasn't many places to go to get a rock star ring, you know. And so I count those as amongst my icons.
But you mentioned Crystal Haze. Crystal Haze is an enormous success to my mind. So how this idea first came into your mind?
Well, I like I said to you before, I was working for many years with this guy that was just bringing gems to me, and so I started to sort of be really, really fascinated, not just in what the material was, but what the material could look like, because a lot of these stones, some were very expensive, but some were not. Some were way less expensive, like quartz, you know, citrines, amethysts, you know, clear quartz, rose quartz. You could have some fun with them. You know, if you cut it and it was wasteful, it didn't really matter, because in the end you got what you want. And so I could play around with cuts in these materials that you would never be able to do with a ruby, sapphire, etc. And I think through that I ended up with this sort of idea, which the concept was already probably 100 years old, you know, of a doublet. You know, a doublet, for those people who don't know, was traditionally a piece of very, very thin piece of opal, and then they would put a cabochon of clear quartz on top, so it made the opal look bigger than it was. So I would sort of take this concept and sort of put it on steroids. So instead of putting a cabochon piece of quartz, I'd facet it and curve it, cut it in a curve. And what happened was I was starting to see that this wasn't just about making the piece of material underneath look bigger. It was making it do something that was all about the light that was coming in through the faceted quartz. And so this, once I got onto that, I thought this feels like something new, you know, and like all things that are new, it takes a while for people to understand it. And I think mostly in my industry, people would rather laugh at it than embrace it then, because there are so many traditions. There's so much that you can't do. So if you start breaking the rules, you know, that's not really the way you do it. But then, of course, a client comes along and says, I don't care about the rules. I really like that ring. That looks like a kind of, you know, a knuckle duster that I want to wear. And that led it. So it was driven by clients who were ready for something that wasn't, you know, just traditional jewelry.
Okay, and some more questions from our audience. Actually, they are connected to the thing we're just discussing, when you woke up famous. So the question is, what is for you more interesting to create before or after you became famous? And is there any difference between being on the jewelry Olymp and not on the jewelry Olymp?
Well, okay, there's very
It's difficult.
interesting. Yeah, because I think for 15 years of my jewelry life, I was very, very happy designing and making jewelry that was under the radar, but was still everything I wanted my jewelry to be. You know, I like I said, I was living in California. I had a style. There was a client. It didn't put me on the map, but it didn't matter because you didn't think about those things. And then with all the things I've said, you suddenly get sort of discovered, if you like. Now, the difference between before and after being discovered is that your enthusiasm just goes by 10 times because you've suddenly got people have coming to you for what you're doing, right? Rather than it sort of being on a shelf and someone might buy it or not buy it. You've got people coming to you. They want what you're doing. So it gives you a lot of confidence as a designer because you can see that you're doing the right thing. And then so a lot of the caution can just go. You just go, I feel I can do what I want in a way, you know, in jewelry. because it felt like that's what people wanted. You know, I mean, I would have stores come to me and want to push me further. You know, they're like, you know, what's next? What's next? And so creatively, it was a very exciting time. And I think going back to the, you know, famous or not famous, I think there was a period of maybe 5 years or more where I literally felt like we were making jewelry for nearly everybody who was famous. And it was so exciting for me, for my team, you know, because people are becoming in the studio and it just gives you a whole different purpose. So I suppose all of it is creatively important, but when you get a little bit discovered, it's really exciting. So it makes you, I think, just inside feel good about what you're doing. Yeah.
But when you're on the streets in London, do people recognize you? Do they say, "Oh, hello, Steven"? Or they know
Sometimes.
random the name?
I mean, I'm still only a jeweler, but you know, we kind of, I suppose, you know, yes, people do, but it's not like being famous like an actor or a singer. You know, people just can say, "Oh, I love your jewelry." You know, that's what they would probably do. Yeah, you know, they never come up to me and say, "I hate your jewelry." I haven't had that yet. maybe those people be quiet.
And one more question from our viewers. What do you think about jewelry art and jewelry market in 5 years? How it will look like?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because jewelry has had another moment. And I think there's what's really exciting is that the people that are interested in jewelry are much younger age now. So, you know, my daughter now works with me and she's 30 and she loves jewelry. And I mean, she wasn't in the jewelry business. She was making films and film content living in Germany and nothing to do with jewelry. And I thought, wow, I could see that this was the communication that we needed because, you know, big brands were using her and the agency she worked for. And so I asked her to come and work with me. So she was at first a bit reluctant because she's like, well, I don't know, you know, I do this and you do that. And I said, well, we need that. So she brought that on board and now does all of our campaigns and everything and content. But she loves jewelry and she's got such a passion for the jewelry. She started to work with my design teams in a way that reminds me a little bit of when I was younger because she's thinking about jewelry for her age group. So they can be, say, from 25 to, you know, 35, you know, a millennial type age group. And when I look at those people, they love jewelry. You know, it starts really young. You know, it can be from all the piercings to like layers and, you know, it's often you see young people with you know, they may not be important jewelry. It doesn't matter. It's that they love jewelry. And so there's that side, which is always exciting because it means that those people are going to develop into, you know, a different kind of jewelry connoisseur. Whereas, you know, when I started myself, you tended to make jewelry, even though I was young, for older people. They weren't in my age group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it took a while for me to catch up with my age group. But I think that's exciting. And then I think the more important jewelry space. You know, you're seeing now some, you know, just phenomenal jewelry that's we'll call art jewelry that's got, you know, there's plenty of it out there. And I think it's because there's clients for it where, you know, they're treating jewelry like they would a piece of art, which is also very encouraging because, you know, one of the things that I find, you know, the most disappointing in a piece of jewelry is if you put a lot of effort into design and creativity and then someone judges it on the weight of the gold and the value of the diamonds. You're like, you know, you know, if you want that, just go and buy a big diamond in a plain ring because, you know, I'm trying to bring something else to the table. And all my friends who are designer jewelers would feel the same. They want people to look at their work with a more artistic view as well as it being jewelry.
And speaking about the new ethics, about this attention to ecology and things like that. So, did it influence your brand, or did it change it somehow? You know, like the recycled materials, the ecological impact, all these things.
Yeah, I mean, nearly 10 years ago, well, probably was 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I was very aware of the problems in, well, certainly in the industry as far as diamonds, that was earlier, and then gold. And I think at the time that people were starting to look and question about where a diamond comes from, it was easier for me to avoid what would be considered to be a conflict diamond. It was easier. But with gold, because gold's metal and you kind of melt it and, you know, you can't really trace it. I wanted to know a bit more about where it came from. And I went with fair trade to Peru, to some mines. And, you know, I could really see the evidence myself. I didn't want to read about it. I went and saw of like real poverty, and not just poverty, working in such dangerous conditions as what can happen in sort of artisanal, unregulated gold mining. And it kind of made me think, I really want to be able to know that the materials I'm using are not just ignoring that this is something that happens in my industry. And so I think ever since then, I've always tried to sort of champion a responsibility in what we do. Now, 9 or 10 years ago, honestly, my clients didn't care. They really didn't care. I would come back and talk about it, and I think they just thought, okay, brilliant, what's the price of this ring? You know, they didn't really think about it. But I think, as we know now, it's the reason someone might make a purchase. You know, they want to know that the people, and that can be any luxury. You know, it can be from Hermes with the leather to, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. And so you kind of make it part of what you are, that you want to be transparent and be able to offer something to people that they don't have to be cautious about, thinking, well, where did this come from? You know, and I think it's very important to us for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about lab-grown diamonds? Because you had the project with Atelier Swarovski built on the lab-grown.
Yeah.
So what is your point of view?
Yeah, well, I feel that there's a place, 100% a place for a lab-grown diamond, because, you know, anything that can replicate what has happened and can't continue to happen. So a diamond was formed, let's just say, 50 million years ago, and the Earth is not making any new ones, right? So you've got the ones you've got, and the only way you can get access to them is just keep on digging, right? That's a reality. So that's just the way the industry is. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, the communities that are supported by the diamond industry are not now much better looked after, better educated. There's a lot has happened. It needed to, but it has. But that's kind of the mining industry. Then you've got, which actually started in Russia, the technology to create what the Earth did in a laboratory. And you're like, wow, that's mad. That's like alchemy. You know, it's like making gold out of something else. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I feel like all technology, it's just going to progress and progress. And I think that there is going to be a point where people just accept, you know, there's a mined diamond, a natural diamond from the earth, and there's one that's come from a laboratory. And as long as you know which one came from where, I think then people can make their own choices. So I don't use, in Stephen Webster, we don't use laboratory diamonds. I'm not saying we won't ever, but we don't at the moment. When I worked with Swarovski, that's because Swarovski make everything they work with. So that makes complete sense. But there's a place for a laboratory grown diamond. I'm not pretending they don't exist. I think some sides of our industry would rather that they went away, but they're not going anywhere. That's what I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you mentioned that there are quite a lot of interesting designers right now and art jewelry. So our viewers are asking, what names should we follow? Who do you consider interesting from the young designers?
Well, I think I've got like people like Thomas Donacek. He's Polish, but he's in London. He's a really creative designer. Fernando Georg, is Brazilian. He's in London. Amazing. Hannah Martin. You know, I don't know if anyone knows these names. I think maybe some. I think Fernando.
I think Thomas is known. Thomas is known because he's in Mercury. So he's sold in Russia. Right, so I think people are aware.
So, you know, like I say, Hannah Martin is another one. In America, one of my close friends, he's been around as long as me, but Alex Sepkus is a designer that I just love his work and the way he thinks. And so, you know, I think, to be honest, the list would probably never end. But what's exciting is that I think going back to my story and, you know, this sort of opportunity that came along for me because I was making jewelry that I wanted to make. And then I was discovered because there wasn't much choice in that area. Now, oh my God, the choice is never ending. You know, I mean, I'm always looking at things and going, oh my God, you know, it's hard to believe sometimes, even for me, the creativity that goes on with something, you know, like a ring, which is sort of relatively small, and people can continuously look at it differently. And then there's an enthusiasm for it. So whereas a jeweler's shop wasn't a very creative place, had lovely jewelry, looked like treasure, like I said. But now, you know, there's just many designers that just bring something new all the time.
And one more question from our audience. What was the most technically difficult piece you've ever made?
Technically difficult. Okay, well, I have a piece in the Museum of Natural History in New York and another piece in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Both of them are made of titanium and they're very sculptural. They are from my Jules Verne collection, which is very much about a fantasy undersea world, and they're both made of titanium, which is a very, very difficult material to use in a sculptural way. And the reason why the piece is in the V&A is because it's kind of used as an example, I think, of probably one of the first really sculptural pieces of jewelry made all out of titanium. I mean, it's got diamonds and sapphires, black sapphires, blue sapphires. So it's precious, but there's no gold, no other precious metal, just titanium. So those pieces, which I love to make, and they're completely different to making something in gold, which I'm really used to. And the challenge I think at first, sometimes when you try something new, it's easy to give up because it's just this is too complicated, forget it, And then when you finish it, well, it's now in a museum, and you go, wow, if we'd not done that, that wouldn't be in that museum. And I think those challenges are the ones that pay off, can be very satisfying if they work out.
I see. And well, speaking about now, what are you currently working on? What will be the new collection, or what you can unveil for the moment?
Well, we because of lockdown year, I felt that I had a lot of time to be creative, because the year before lockdown, my life was spent, 5 months of the year I was on a plane going somewhere, which is fine. It means you've got a lot of variety in your life, but it's also a lot of time spent when you're traveling and you're either jet lagged or you're whatever. And so when the lockdown started, I think at first I felt a bit lost because I suddenly was just in the same place every day, which was my kitchen. and I think a lot of people probably felt the same, and then you get a bit panicky. But I think then quite quickly we started to sort of, or I personally started to think about the things that I could do that I wasn't able to do as much because I was traveling so much. So we've got quite a lot of newness in our collection. So I've got my homeware, which is, my barware, which is, all made of metal and bronze and steel. And now I work a lot in glass, which I didn't know anything about glass until about 3 years ago. I love it. But, so I'm working with people in Czech Republic, in Italy, in England with glass and then different elements to the homeware, which I've really, really enjoyed because it's outside of jewelry, but in some ways it goes back a bit to what I was saying when I was at art school and I was making silver things for the table. And at the time, actually, my tutor at the time said, don't pursue that. He said, because it's a dying industry, and it was true. It was. People weren't having so much silver for their table and knives and forks, and it nearly died. But now we're so busy making amazing things for people. Okay, for me, it's more for the bar, but that's because we do that really well. And it's, I don't know, I feel like it's big jewelry, it's things that they get used and appreciated and in a similar way. So that's been quite good. And then the thing that's been very interesting, I think, over the last couple of years has been this sort of huge rise in attention for men's jewelry. And I've always done men's jewelry, but you sort of accept that it's a small little part of what you do because for every one man's piece, you'll probably sell 20 pieces of women's jewelry. But now there's this massive enthusiasm, and I think guys have really embraced. They've got more confidence. 20 years ago, I'd have to tell a guy what he could wear because he would ask me, say, "Do you think I can wear this bracelet?" I'm like, "Well, don't you know?" but they didn't know. Women knew what they wanted, but men, they just didn't have the confidence. And now that confidence is there. And so that's really exciting for us because I love men's jewelry anyway. And I think it's a bit like that thing of being discovered. Once something's been discovered, so like our men's jewelry now gets more attention and stores want more, including Mercury, want more men's, it gives you more reason to be more creative with it. So we've got that, and then believe it or not, I've never ever had an off-the-shelf kind of bridal line, because I always thought the people who come to me for their wedding rings are always wanting something completely different. So I do a bespoke. So that doesn't matter who it is, you know, a lot of high-profile people. And so we're about to launch next week our bridal line, and I've given it a home. And I can say it now because it came out in the magazine yesterday. It's called the No Regrets Chapel. And so my home for my barware is the No Regrets Lounge. And so we've got the No Regrets Chapel. So it's where people can come and find all the jewelry that we now make for, I call it shotgun. I don't know if you know that expression. Do you know a shotgun wedding? If you need to get married
No.
very, very quickly. Well, usually it's if the bride is pregnant, and then the father of the bride has a shotgun holding to the head of the groom to say, "You've got to marry my daughter." So that's where the term comes from. So we're calling it the shotgun wedding, bridal. So they're all quite new things. And then along with that is the jewelry. We launch new jewelry every year, you know, more crystal haze, more kind of creative jewelry, if you like.
I see. So some of our viewers have mentioned that you are talking from your office, and so they ask to tell something more about your team members. So how big is the team who works for you? Tell us more.
Yeah, well, I've got a team of 27. So, and then Asia's one, and then my daughter Amy and my brother. So in the family, there's 4 of us. We all do very different things, except for my brother and I are both jewelers. So we both, you know, we're jewelers making jewelry, and we can both do that. But as the business has grown, you know, first of all, it was me and my brother sat at the bench, and then gradually, you know, I have to do my thing and he has to do his thing. But my longest term employee, Mike, he's a jeweler for me, and he's worked for me for 30 years, which is amazing. You know, when someone works for you that long, you see them being from a really young person to having a family, and it's really great. So my head designer, Claire, she's been with me 19 years. And then our managing director, Kate, she's been 18 years. They never leave. I don't know. Anyway, but what's really cool, I think, in those times with those team members who have been in this business, you know, a long, long time, they all have a lot of pride in when we have success. You know, they all enjoy that we have that success, and I think they like that I'm a creative person who just keeps on wanting to challenge myself and my team. I get bored, so I want to keep moving, you know, and I think that they like that. I think most of them have said, if we leave here, what jeweler are we going to work for? We like working for this jeweler because we're part of what it is, you know. So I think really, sorry, that's my managing director calling me. She must have heard. I think the rest of the team, I've got 3 designers, including myself. I've got about 3 or 4 jewelers who are in the workshop. I've got marketing people. I've got, you know, salespeople. It's the usual things that you build. But I think what's really fascinating for us now is how kind of united you have to be with your voice, you know, your content, you know, everything has to be sort of integrated and work together. Whereas maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I made some jewelry and then you know, I would go out and sell it or meet a client. And now all these things, like today we launched our new campaign, you know, which my daughter has been working on. And then one of my friends has written this track for it. It's called She's a Killer, and it's an amazing track. And so that's a whole team, you know, amazing. They're not all necessarily in my under one roof, because we've got, this is my showroom, and then my studio is over there in another building. And then we have an office in New York, but that's just a very small office. So.
Okay, I have to remind our viewers that we have like several minutes left, so it's your last chance to ask Steven some questions, and I will ask mine. So, well, you are a rock and roll star, you know, like a rock and roll jewelry star, let's say it this way, but you had quite a different experience working with Garrard, with a very traditional, very royal brand. How was it for you?
Well, it's very interesting. My connection with Garrard has gone back to 1995, when I was really, I want to say, at that early stage of becoming someone that people knew in the industry as being, you know, I say rebellious. It's not about being rebellious. It's just being rebellious against all of the traditions that were there, you know, and wanting to burst out of that. And during that period, the person who was running Garrard, whose daughter is my managing director, so we've got like a real connection. He loved what I was doing. And even though Garrard at that time in 1995 was the establishment, he loved British craftsmanship. And even though my jewelry has got a bit rock and roll and all the things you said, it's still beautifully made. It follows all the rules that I believe you need to apply to fine jewelry. And so he said, I want to give you an exhibition. So he gave me this kind of one-man show, and it was sort of incredible, because in the establishment, they've now got this Stephen Webster jewelry, but they loved it. They really loved it. And I think it was because it was just so different to what they have been selling for many hundreds of years. But it was just a different spirit. And I think that that started my kind of relationship. And then later, much later, 15 years ago, no, not 15, 12 years ago, I was asked to be creative director of Garrard. And I really was hesitant, because it was not something that was fitting into necessarily my plan. And at first I said no, but then I said yes. And I could understand what my job was to be at Garrard. And it was really about bringing back, at that time, I think, a real sort of sense of Britishness back into this very British brand called Garrard. And so once I understood my role, and I performed that role for 5 years, and then I sort of handed over, if you like, to the people who are, like Sarah's the creative director now. She's the perfect creative director, but it needed someone to connect where they were at that time and where they are again now. Because I think now they are very much at the forefront of a very British jewelry, classical, beautiful classical jewelry, which there's not much, because, you know, most of the big jewelry houses are not, they're French or Italian or, you know, American. So it was a moment, and I enjoyed it. But it's I wouldn't make that my life. My life is Stephen Webster jewelry. Yeah.
Maybe because we're saying rock and roll several times, one of our viewers is asking, have you ever made jewelry for hip hop artists?
Hip hop? No, not really. I mean, I've made jewelry. Jay-Z's got some of my jewelry, and you know, I know she's not really hip hop, but like Rihanna, Beyonce. So they're in that kind of world, but you know, that really blinging hip hop style. is not really my style. You know, they go to Jacob the jeweler, really, you know, or someone like that who has catered very well to that crowd, you know. And I think my kind of I think my aesthetic has very much fallen into a more. It's difficult to say rock and roll, isn't it? Because rock and roll can pop, rock and roll. You know, I mean, even in Korea. So I've got K-pop artists who love my jewelry in Korea, and it's like, okay, you know, these things just kind of come along. But it's not. I'm not really a bling-in kind of a designer. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Stephen. It was a very nice and interesting hour and a very big laugh. So may I ask you one thing, as you know, like as the final thing of our webinar today, may you say something to the people, to young people, to those who decide right now whether to become jewelers or not. So something inspiring or not inspiring, something you want to tell them.
I think I could be the embodiment of someone who's I've really enjoyed my life, and I've been only a jeweler, right? That's it. I've never done anything else. I've 46 years I've been a jeweler, and I think, you know, in order for that to happen, that those early days, which, you know, if I'm talking to some people who are young and they're thinking about jewelry, my passion came from a place I didn't even know, because I didn't know people made jewelry for a living. And I think it's really important for whatever you do, and jewelry being one, that you do feel something really passionate about what it is you're about to do. And I'm very lucky that I do have a lot of connections with young people coming into this industry, and I always say that to them. And I can't see your viewers, unfortunately, but when I've got someone sat in front of me, I can see if somebody's really got a passion that they really want to express as being a jeweler. And I think from then on, it's really about finding your way to learn this industry, because it's very easy to honestly say, oh, I can be a jeweler, I can do some pictures and someone can make the jewelry. That's not what being a jeweler is about. You know, you need to be really immersed in what's a beautiful industry. We work with the most amazing materials. You know, they've got to fire up something in you, and then you can have a lovely life. I mean, I've laughed a lot in my life and I've met some amazing people, and I've traveled the whole world through being a jeweler. So I'd say it's, and I had no advantages, trust me. It was, you know, you create your own advantages. So I highly recommend it, but I think you've got to have something in you that you really want to be a jeweler.
Thank you, Stephen. That was awesome, as always. And I will switch to Russian. Спасибо всем нашим зрителям, спасибо всем, кто нас смотрел. Надеюсь, было интересно.
Well, спасибо большое.